The snow was falling harder than the weather forecast had predicted, turning the parking lot of Miller's 24-hour diner into a sheet of ice that reflected the neon signs like scattered diamonds. David Chen pulled his old Honda into the lot at 2:47 a.m., his 8-year-old daughter Sophie fast asleep in the back seat, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. He'd been driving for 3 hours straight, trying to get her fever down after another sleepless night. The children's hospital had finally released them with antibiotics and instructions to monitor her temperature, but Sophie had been asking for pancakes the entire drive home, and David had learned long ago that sometimes giving in to a sick child's cravings was just good parenting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As he parked under the flickering streetlight, something caught his attention in his peripheral vision. A sleek black BMW sat in the far corner of the lot, engine running, exhaust visible in the frigid air. What made him look twice wasn't the expensive car, it was the figure slumped over the steering wheel. David's military training kicked in immediately, the same instincts that had kept him alive during 2 tours in Afghanistan. Someone might need help. He checked Sophie, still sleeping soundly, her fever finally broken, then grabbed his jacket and walked carefully across the icy pavement. The BMW's windows were fogged, but he could make out the silhouette of a woman inside. As he approached, he noticed designer clothes through the windshield, perfectly styled blonde hair now disheveled, and what looked like tears frozen on her cheeks. She was definitely asleep, or worse. David tapped gently on the passenger window, not wanting to startle her but concerned enough to risk it. The woman jolted awake, her hand immediately going to what he assumed was pepper spray in her purse. Her eyes were red and swollen, mascara streaked down her face, and she looked at him with the wariness of someone who'd been hurt before. When she cracked the window, he could smell expensive perfume mixed with the salt of dried tears. "Ma'am, are you okay?" David asked, keeping his voice low and non-threatening. "I noticed you've been sitting here for a while, and with this weather, I just wanted to make sure you weren't having car trouble or anything." The woman stared at him for a long moment, taking in his simple jeans and military-issue jacket, the way he stood with his hands visible, the genuine concern in his voice. She glanced past him to his Honda, where Sophie was visible in the back seat, then back to his face. Something in her expression shifted, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "I'm fine," she said quietly, but her voice cracked on the words. "Just needed somewhere to think." David nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. "Well, if you're planning to stay out here much longer, you might want to come inside. The diner's warm and the coffee's decent. Plus, this storm's supposed to get worse before morning." Emma Richardson had built her empire from nothing, clawing her way from a trailer park in rural Kentucky to the corner office of a Fortune 500 tech company in downtown Denver. At 34, she commanded boardrooms filled with men twice her age, made decisions that affected thousands of employees, and had a net worth that most people couldn't even comprehend. But tonight, sitting in her BMW in a diner parking lot at nearly 3 a.m., she felt like that scared little girl again, the one who used to hide in closets when her stepfather came home drunk. The board meeting had ended 6 hours ago, but Emma couldn't bring herself to go home to her empty penthouse apartment. The hostile takeover attempt by Meridian Industries had been successfully fought off, but barely, and the stress of the last 3 months had finally caught up with her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She'd driven aimlessly through Denver's streets, ending up here because she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a real meal instead of grabbing protein bars between meetings. The stranger outside her window didn't look like the usual type who approached expensive cars in parking lots. He wasn't eyeing her jewelry or asking for money. His concern seemed genuine, and there was something about the way he'd positioned himself, hands visible, non-threatening posture, that spoke of someone with training or experience dealing with people in crisis. Emma had learned to read people quickly in the corporate world, and this man radiated the kind of steady calm that came from facing real problems, not boardroom politics. David noticed her hesitation and took a step back, giving her space. "Look, I'm not trying to intrude. I've got my daughter in the car. We just came from the hospital, and she's been asking for pancakes for the last hour. We're going to grab a quick bite, and you're welcome to join us if you want some company." Sometimes sitting with strangers is easier than sitting alone. Something about his honesty broke through Emma's carefully constructed walls. This man, who drove a car that was probably older than her assistant, was offering kindness to a complete stranger at 3 a.m. without expecting anything in return. When was the last time someone had shown her simple human decency without wanting something from her company, her connections, or her money? She turned off the BMW's engine and gathered her purse, stepping out into the bitter cold. David immediately shrugged off his jacket and held it out to her, noticing she was wearing only a business suit despite the freezing temperature. "You'll catch pneumonia dressed like that," he said matter-of-factly. Emma accepted the jacket, surprised by the gesture and by how warm it still was from his body heat. As they walked toward the diner, she found herself studying this man who'd approached her car in the middle of the night. He was tall and solidly built, with the kind of easy confidence that came from real experience rather than corporate posturing. His wedding ring was absent, but the way he'd mentioned his daughter suggested he was raising her alone. "I'm David, by the way," he said as they reached the diner's entrance. "And the little one in the car is Sophie. She's 8, and she has opinions about pancakes that border on the philosophical." "Emma," she replied, realizing she hadn't introduced herself to someone without adding her title in years. Just Emma, not CEO Emma Richardson, of Richardson Technologies. Not the woman whose picture graced magazine covers and business journals. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was just a person meeting another person. The diner was nearly empty, except for a tired-looking waitress reading a paperback novel and a trucker nursing his third cup of coffee. David guided Emma to a booth near the window where they could see his car, and she watched as he waved to his daughter, who had apparently woken up and was now pressed against the window, breath fogging the glass as she watched them with curious eyes. David brought Sophie inside after she'd tapped insistently on the car window, her fever completely gone and her energy restored by the promise of late-night pancakes. She slipped into the booth beside him, studying Emma with the unfiltered curiosity that only children possessed. Emma found herself oddly nervous under the child's gaze, unused to interacting with kids outside of the occasional charity photo opportunity. "Are you a princess?" Sophie asked bluntly, taking in Emma's expensive clothes and jewelry. "You look like one, but you seem sad." "Princesses in movies are usually happy." David felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Sophie, that's not polite to ask strangers personal questions." Emma surprised them both by laughing, the first genuine sound of joy she'd made in months. "No, sweetheart, I'm not a princess. Just someone who had a very long day at work." The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and comfortable shoes, approached their shuti table with a coffee pot. "Well, aren't you three a sight? What can I get you folks?" David ordered chocolate chip pancakes for Sophie and coffee for himself, while Emma requested just coffee, claiming she wasn't hungry. Sophie immediately protested. "Daddy says you should never drink coffee on an empty stomach. It makes your tummy hurt. You should get pancakes too. They make everything better." Emma found herself agreeing to a short stack, touched by the child's earnest concern. As the waitress walked away, Sophie continued her interrogation. "Why were you sleeping in your car? Don't you have a house?" "Sophie," David warned gently, but Emma held up a hand. "It's okay. I do have a house, but sometimes adults need time to think about complicated things, and sitting quietly helps with that." Sophie nodded seriously. "Like when Daddy sits on the porch after I go to bed. He thinks I don't know, but I see him through my window. He gets the same sad face you have." David felt exposed under Emma's curious gaze. This wasn't how he'd planned to spend his evening, certainly not sharing personal details with a stranger who clearly lived in a different world than he did. But something about Emma made him want to be honest, perhaps because she seemed to carry her own weight of unspoken burdens. The food arrived quickly, and Sophie immediately began her systematic approach to pancake consumption, cutting them into precise squares, and eating them in a specific pattern that David had long ago stopped questioning. Emma watched this ritual with fascination, as if observing an alien species in their natural habitat. "Tell me about yourself, David," Emma said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug for warmth. "What do you do when you're not rescuing women from parking lots at 3 in the morning?" David laughed, the sound rough from exhaustion. I run a small construction company. Nothing fancy, mostly residential remodeling and repair work. We specialize in helping families make their homes more accessible. Ramps for wheelchairs, bathroom modifications for elderly folks, that sort of thing. Emma nodded, genuinely interested. In her world of corporate mergers and market strategies, she rarely met people who worked with their hands to solve real, immediate problems. That sounds meaningful. How did you get into that line of work? The question opened a door David usually kept locked. He glanced at Sophie, who was now drawing patterns in her syrup, then back at Emma. My wife was in a car accident 3 years ago. She survived, but she was paralyzed from the waist down. We learned pretty quickly how many barriers exist for people with disabilities, how many homes and businesses aren't designed for wheelchairs or walkers. I started doing modifications for us, then for other families dealing with similar challenges. Emma's expression softened with understanding and sympathy. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was, David continued, his voice steady but his eyes distant. Sarah was a physical therapist before the accident. She loved helping people regain their strength and mobility. After her injury, she fell into a deep depression. The woman who used to encourage others to keep fighting gave up on herself. Sophie looked up from her artistic syrup creation. Mommy went to heaven because she was too sad to stay with us, but Daddy says she's watching over us now, and that's why I'm so brave at the doctor. David's throat tightened. Even after 18 months, talking about Sarah's suicide was like swallowing broken glass. She struggled with chronic pain and the loss of independence. We tried therapy, medication, support groups. But some battles are harder to win than others. Emma felt a stab of recognition. She understood that kind of pain, the weight of loss that followed you everywhere. Her own demons were different, but equally persistent. I'm sorry for your loss. Both of you. That takes incredible strength to rebuild after something like that. Some days are better than others, David admitted. Sophie keeps me focused on moving forward. She has this way of finding joy in the smallest things. It reminds me that life is still worth living. Sophie beamed at the compliment, then turned her attention to Emma. What about you? Do you have kids? The question hit Emma like a physical blow. She set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. The memories she'd spent years suppressing, rushing back with overwhelming force. No, sweetheart, I don't have children. But that wasn't entirely true, and the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. She'd been pregnant once, 12 years ago, when she was still climbing the corporate ladder and dating Marcus, a fellow executive who'd seemed like the perfect partner for her ambitious lifestyle. They'd planned everything carefully, from prenatal vitamins to private schools to trust funds. Emma had been 4 months along when the bleeding started. The miscarriage had been swift and devastating. One day she was planning nursery colors, the next she was lying in a hospital bed being told that sometimes these things just happened. Marcus had been sympathetic but practical, suggesting they try again once her career was more established. But Emma's body had other plans. 3 more miscarriages over 2 years had left her emotionally shattered and medically advised that pregnancy wasn't advisable. Marcus had left not long after, claiming he needed a partner who could give him the family he wanted. Emma had thrown herself into work with renewed fury, building Richardson Technologies from a struggling startup into a billion-dollar empire. But success couldn't fill the void where her children should have been. David noticed her distress and gently redirected the conversation. Sophie, finish your pancakes. We should let Emma enjoy her breakfast in peace. But Emma surprised him by continuing. I wanted children once. It didn't work out the way I hoped. Sophie studied Emma's face with the intuitive wisdom that children sometimes possessed. That makes you sad, doesn't it? Like how Daddy gets sad when he looks at pictures of Mommy. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. This 8-year-old had seen through her carefully constructed facade in minutes, recognizing the grief that her board of directors and business partners had never detected. You know what my daddy taught me? Sophie continued, reaching across the table to pat Emma's hand with sticky fingers. Sad feelings are like thunderstorms. They're really loud and scary, but they always pass, and then the sun comes out again. Maybe you just need to wait for your son." David felt pride swell in his chest at his daughter's compassion, mixed with amazement at how easily she'd connected with this polished stranger. Emma looked stunned, as if no one had offered her such simple, profound comfort in years. "Thank you, Sophie," Emma whispered. "That's very wise advice." As they finished their meal, Emma found herself studying this unlikely pair who'd wandered into her life at her lowest moment. David moved through the world with quiet confidence, clearly devoted to his daughter, but carrying his own burden of loss. Sophie chattered easily about school, her friends, and her elaborate theories about why purple was the best color, occasionally asking Emma questions that revealed a sharp intelligence beneath her childish enthusiasm. When the check arrived, Emma reached for it automatically, but David was faster. "My invitation, my treat," he said firmly. "That's not necessary. I can afford it." "I'm sure you can, but that's not the point. Sometimes it's important to let people do things for you." Emma realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had paid for her meal without expecting something in return. In her world, every dinner was a business transaction, every gesture calculated for advantage. This simple act of kindness from a man who clearly had far less money than she did felt like a gift she didn't know how to accept. As they prepared to leave, Sophie tugged on Emma's sleeve. "Will we see you again? I like you. You listen when I talk, and most grown-ups don't really do that." Emma looked down at the child's hopeful face, then at David, who was watching their interaction with careful interest. She should say no, should return to her world of conference calls and quarterly reports, should pretend this encounter had never happened. These people lived in a different universe than hers, one where authentic emotions mattered more than profit margins. But something about their warmth, their genuine acceptance of her at her most vulnerable, made her want to hold on to this connection just a little longer. "I'd like that very much," Emma heard herself saying, surprising everyone, including herself. Emma kept her promise to Sophie, though she wasn't sure what had possessed her to make it in the first place. 3 days after their midnight encounter at the diner, she found herself standing outside Denver Elementary School at 3:15 in the afternoon, feeling completely out of place among the other parents in their casual clothes and minivans. Her black Tesla drew curious stares, as did her tailored business suit, but she ignored the attention and scanned the crowd for familiar faces. Sophie spotted her first, breaking away from the line of children and running toward her with unbridled excitement. "Emma, you came! Daddy said you were probably too busy with important work stuff, but I knew you'd remember." David appeared moments later, looking surprised and pleased to see her. He'd changed from his construction clothes into clean jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his hair still damp from what was obviously a quick shower. "I didn't think you'd actually show up," he admitted with a smile that made something flutter in Emma's chest. "I always keep my promises to children," Emma replied, realizing it was true. In her business dealings, she might negotiate and postpone and restructure agreements, but something about Sophie's innocent trust had made this commitment sacred. Sophie grabbed Emma's hand with the casual possessiveness of childhood. "Come on, I want to show you my classroom and introduce you to Mrs. Patterson. She's going to be so impressed that I know someone who drives a car like that." As Sophie dragged her toward the school building, Emma caught David's amused expression. "She's been talking about you nonstop since Tuesday night," he said quietly. "I hope you're prepared for the full tour." When Sophie likes someone, she goes all in. The classroom was bright and colorful, filled with the kind of cheerful chaos that Emma remembered from her own elementary school, days before life had taught her to value order and control above all else. Sophie's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a woman in her 40s with paint-stained fingers and genuine warmth in her eyes. "So you're the mysterious Emma that Sophie's been telling us about," Mrs. Patterson said with a knowing smile. "She's quite taken with you. Would you like to see some of her recent work?" Emma found herself genuinely interested as Sophie showed off her science project about butterflies, complete with detailed drawings and observations about metamorphosis. The child had an artist's eye for detail and a scientist's curiosity about how things worked. Her writing was advanced for her age, full of complex sentences and sophisticated vocabulary that suggested she was reading well above grade level. "She's gifted," Emma observed to David as Sophie chattered with her teacher about upcoming projects. "The school wants to move her up a grade, but I'm not sure it's the right choice," David confided. "Academically, she's ready, but socially and emotionally, she's still 8. She's already been through so much upheaval with losing Sarah." I don't want to isolate her from kids her own age, too. Emma nodded, understanding his dilemma. Have you considered supplemental programs? Enrichment activities that could challenge her intellectually without removing her from her peer group. David's expression grew rueful. Most of those programs are expensive, and they're usually scheduled during times when I'm working. Single-parent logistics are complicated. Before Emma could respond, Sophie bounced back over to them, her face bright with excitement. Mrs. Patterson says there's a science fair next month, and I can pick any topic I want. Emma, you're smart about business stuff, right? Could you help me think of a project? Emma felt David's eyes on her, waiting to see how she'd respond to his daughter's request. The logical part of her brain pointed out that she had quarterly reports to review, board meetings to prepare for, and a hostile takeover attempt to continue fending off. She had no business getting involved in elementary school science projects. But looking down at Sophie's hopeful face, Emma heard herself saying, I'd be honored to help. What kind of science interests you most? The conversation that followed revealed Sophie's fascination with renewable energy, sparked by a documentary she'd watched about wind farms. Emma found herself explaining solar panel technology and battery storage in terms an 8-year-old could understand, surprised by how much she enjoyed breaking down complex concepts into simple, engaging explanations. We could build a model house that runs entirely on solar power, Emma suggested, her mind already racing with possibilities. Show how the energy gets captured, stored, and used for different household functions. Sophie's eyes went wide with excitement. Could we really build that? With real solar panels and everything? Absolutely. I know some suppliers who could help us get the materials we need. David looked concerned. Emma, that sounds like it could get expensive. I appreciate the offer, but I can't ask you to spend money on something like that. You're not asking, I'm offering. And it's not about the money. Emma paused, realizing she was about to reveal more than she'd intended. I've been funding STEM education programs for years through my company's foundation, but I've never actually worked directly with a student. This would be a first for me, too. Over the following weeks, Emma found herself carving out time in her impossibly busy schedule for what she told herself were educational consultations, but felt more like the highlight of her days. She and Sophie met twice a week at David's modest duplex, transforming his dining room table into a workspace filled with wires, batteries, miniature solar panels, and increasingly sophisticated architectural plans. Emma discovered that Sophie was a natural engineer, capable of visualizing how systems fit together and troubleshooting problems with an intuitive understanding that impressed even Emma's technical team when she consulted them for advice. The child asked questions that cut straight to the heart of complex issues, unencumbered by assumptions about what was supposed to be difficult. David watched their collaboration with growing amazement, and something else he was reluctant to name. Emma had shed her corporate armor during these sessions, arriving in jeans and sweaters instead of designer suits, her hair pulled back in simple ponytails rather than elaborate styles. She laughed at Sophie's jokes, celebrated small victories with genuine enthusiasm, and displayed a patience he'd never seen in any of the high-powered professionals who occasionally hired his construction company. "You're good with kids," he commented one evening as Emma helped Sophie organize their research materials. "Natural teacher instincts." Emma's hands stilled on the papers she was sorting. "I always thought I'd have my own someday." Turns out the universe had different plans. There was pain in her voice that David recognized, the particular ache of dreams that had been forcibly abandoned rather than freely chosen. He'd seen that same expression in Sarah's eyes after her accident, the grief of losing not just what was, but what could have been. "Sophie's lucky to have your attention," he said quietly. "She's been different since you started helping her. More confident, more excited about school. You've given her something I couldn't." Emma looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You've given her everything that matters. Love, stability, support. I'm just the person helping with wiring diagrams." "You're more than that," David said, and the weight of unspoken meaning in his voice made Emma's breath catch. Their moment was interrupted by Sophie's triumphant shout from across the room. "It works! The LED turned on when I connected the solar panel. Emma, look!" Emma hurried over to examine Sophie's handiwork, but she could feel David's gaze following her, and she wondered if she was imagining the shift in the atmosphere between them. This was dangerous territory. allowing herself to care about these people who'd wandered into her carefully controlled life. But as Sophie explained her next ideas for the project, her face glowing with excitement and achievement, Emma realized it might already be too late to protect herself. She was invested now, not just in the science fair project, but in this brilliant child and her devoted father, who'd shown her kindness when she'd needed it most. The warning bells in her mind grew louder when David walked her to her car that evening, his hand briefly touching her elbow as he helped her navigate a patch of ice on his walkway. The contact was innocent, practical, but it sent warmth shooting through her entire body. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything you are doing for Sophie. I know you have important responsibilities, but this means the world to her. To both of us." Emma met his eyes in the glow of the streetlight, seeing gratitude and something deeper reflected there. "It means something to me too. More than I expected when I agreed to help." They stood there for a moment, two people from different worlds who'd found unexpected connection, both aware that whatever was happening between them was more complicated than a simple friendship. Emma's phone buzzed with what was undoubtedly another urgent work crisis. But for once, she ignored it. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "Early meeting tomorrow." "Of course. Drive safely." Emma slid into her Tesla and started the engine, but she found herself reluctant to leave the warm circle of light where David still stood watching. Through her windshield, she could see Sophie's silhouette in the living room window, probably still working on their project. For the first time in years, Emma Richardson had somewhere she'd rather be than her corner office, and that realization terrified her more than any hostile takeover ever could. The science fair was 3 days away when Emma's world began to crumble. She was reviewing quarterly projections in her office when her assistant knocked urgently on the door, her usual composure replaced by barely controlled panic. "Miss Richardson, you need to see this immediately," Jennifer said, rushing in with a tablet displaying the morning's financial news. "Meridian Industries just announced they've acquired 42% of our outstanding shares through shell companies. They're calling for an emergency shareholder meeting." Emma's blood turned to ice as she scanned the headlines. Marcus Webb, her former fiancé and current CEO of Meridian Industries, had been quietly buying up Richardson Technologies stock for months through carefully disguised intermediaries. The hostile takeover she thought she'd successfully defended against had been a smokescreen for this more sophisticated attack. "How is this possible?" Emma demanded, her mind racing through the implications. "Our legal team should have detected any significant share accumulation. They used over 30 different shell companies across multiple jurisdictions," Jennifer explained, her voice tight with worry. "The acquisitions were small enough individually to avoid disclosure requirements, but combined, they give Meridian effective control. The board is meeting in an hour to discuss their options." Emma felt the walls of her carefully constructed empire closing in around her. Richardson Technologies wasn't just her company. It was her life's work, built from nothing after Marcus had abandoned her during the darkest period of her life. The irony that he was now positioned to take it from her wasn't lost on her. Her phone rang, displaying Marcus's number. Emma hesitated for a moment before answering, knowing that whatever he had to say would be calculated to inflict maximum damage. "Emma, darling," Marcus's smooth voice carried its familiar note of condescension. "I hope you've seen the news by now. I wanted to give you the courtesy of a personal call before the board meeting." "What do you want, Marcus?" Emma kept her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "I want what I've always wanted. A company with unlimited potential being run by someone who understands that personal feelings have no place in business decisions. You've done impressive work building Richardson Technologies, but you've let sentiment cloud your judgment. All those charitable programs, the employee benefits packages, the environmental initiatives, they're bleeding money that should be going to shareholders." Emma gripped the phone tighter. "Those programs are what make this company worth leading. They're investments in our future, not drains on our resources." Marcus laughed, the sound as cold as winter wind. Spoken like someone who's never had to make the hard choices. "That's always been your weakness, Emma. You let emotions drive decisions that should be purely logical. It's why you'll never be the leader this company needs." The line went dead, leaving Emma staring at her phone with trembling hands. She thought about Sophie, probably at school right now, excited about demonstrating her solar house project to her classmates. She thought about David, who'd taken the afternoon off work to attend the science fair, and how proud he'd been when he'd seen what his daughter had accomplished. Emma had promised to be there, had committed to helping Sophie present their project to the judges. But if she didn't focus every ounce of her energy on saving her company in the next 72 hours, everything she'd built would be destroyed by the man who'd once claimed to love her. Jennifer appeared in the doorway again, her expression grim. The board meeting has been moved up to 30 minutes from now. Legal wants to prep you on potential defense strategies, and the communications team needs approval for the press releases. Emma nodded mechanically, her mind splitting between the corporate crisis that demanded her immediate attention and the much smaller, more personal promise she'd made to an 8-year-old girl. She pulled up Sophie's contact in her phone, David's number that she'd added weeks ago for project coordination. The phone rang twice before David answered, construction noise evident in the background. "Emma? This is a surprise. Is everything okay?" "David, I need to tell you something, and I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed in me." Emma's voice caught, despite her efforts to maintain composure. "There's been a crisis at my company, a hostile takeover that I need to fight with everything I have. I don't think I can make it to the science fair tomorrow." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Emma wondered if the call had dropped. When David finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "I see. Sophie will be disappointed, but she'll understand. Business emergencies happen. I'm so sorry. I know how much this means to her, and I hate breaking my promise. If there was any other way." "Emma, it's okay. Really, Sophie's strong and she knows you care about her. The project will speak for itself." But Emma could hear the disappointment he was trying to hide, and it cut deeper than any corporate betrayal ever could. She was becoming exactly what she'd always despised. Someone who put business above people, who broke promises to children because stock prices and board meetings were more important than keeping her word. After ending the call, Emma sat in her office for several minutes, staring out at the Denver skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that had once made her feel like she was on top of the world. Now they felt like barriers separating her from the life she'd been building with David and Sophie. The board meeting was a nightmare of corporate politics and barely veiled threats. Marcus attended via video conference, his presence dominating the room despite being hundreds of miles away. He presented his vision for Richardson Technologies with the smooth confidence that had once attracted Emma, but now made her skin crawl. "Under my leadership, we'll eliminate the inefficiencies that have been holding this company back," Marcus explained to the assembled board members. "The charitable foundation will be dissolved, with those resources redirected to research and development. Employee benefit packages will be restructured to industry standards, and the environmental initiatives will be scaled back to regulatory minimums." Emma watched the faces around the conference table, reading the varying degrees of concern and calculation in her colleagues' expressions. Some of these people had been with her from the beginning, had believed in her vision of a company that could be both profitable and socially responsible. Others were newer additions, more focused on quarterly returns than long-term sustainability. "Miss Richardson," said Robert Chen, the board chairman and one of her earliest investors, "what's your response to Mr. Webb's proposal?" Emma stood, drawing on every ounce of strength and conviction she possessed. Richardson Technologies wasn't built to be just another profit-maximizing corporation. We've proven that companies can be successful while also being responsible to their communities and employees. Our charitable programs have improved our public image and employee retention rates. Our environmental initiatives have reduced operating costs and positioned us as leaders in sustainable technology. Abandoning these principles won't make us more successful. It will make us indistinguishable from every other soulless corporation. Marcus's image on the conference room screen showed his familiar smirk. "Passionate words, Emma, but passion doesn't pay dividends. The market rewards results, not good intentions." The debate continued for hours, with lawyers presenting options and financial advisors running scenarios. Emma found herself fighting not just for control of her company, but for the values that had driven her to build it in the first place. Every compromise suggested felt like a betrayal of everything she'd worked toward. As evening approached, Emma realized with growing dread that the science fair was starting in less than an hour. Sophie would be setting up her project, probably looking toward the entrance every few minutes, waiting for Emma to arrive as promised. David would be there, supportive and encouraging, but Emma knew he'd be watching for her too. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was brief but devastating. "Ms. Emma, this is Sophie. Daddy helped me send this. I wanted you to know that our solar house is working perfectly, and I'm not mad that you can't come. I know your work is important. Thank you for teaching me so much. Love, Sophie." Emma stared at the message until the letters blurred through her tears. Here was a child, barely 8 years old, showing more grace and understanding than most adults Emma dealt with in the corporate world. Sophie wasn't angry or demanding explanations. She was simply expressing gratitude and love despite being let down. The board meeting reconvened after a dinner break, with new proposals and counteroffers flying across the table. Emma participated in the discussions, but part of her mind remained fixed on an elementary school gymnasium across town, where a brilliant little girl was presenting a science project that represented weeks of collaboration and shared dreams. At 9:30, as the lawyers were drafting preliminary agreements for yet another compromise proposal, Emma's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo from David, showing Sophie standing proudly next to her. Solar house project. A blue ribbon pinned to the display board. The accompanying message was simple. "First place. She asked me to tell you that she couldn't have done it without you." Emma excused herself from the meeting and stepped into the hallway, leaning against the wall as emotions she'd been suppressing all day finally overwhelmed her. She was on the verge of losing everything she'd built professionally, but somehow that felt less devastating than missing one of the most important moments in Sophie's young life. Her assistant found her there 20 minutes later, clutching her phone and struggling to regain her composure. "Miss Richardson? The board is ready to reconvene. They've reached a preliminary agreement that might allow you to retain operational control while giving Meridian the financial oversight they're demanding." Emma looked up, seeing her reflection in the dark windows of the corridor. The woman staring back at her was successful, powerful, and completely alone. Somewhere across the city, David was probably helping Sophie pack up her award-winning project, both of them understanding that the woman who'd helped make it possible had chosen business over them when it mattered most. For the first time in her professional life, Emma questioned whether winning this battle would be worth what it was costing her to fight it. Emma sat in her Tesla outside the duplex at 11:47 that night, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel as she stared at the warm light glowing through David's living room window. The board meeting had ended an hour ago with a Pyrrhic victory that felt more like defeat. She'd retained control of Richardson Technologies, but at the cost of accepting oversight that would gradually strip away everything that had made the company worth fighting for. Marcus had smiled his cold smile as the lawyers finalized the agreement, knowing he'd achieved his real goal. Emma would remain CEO in name, but every decision would be scrutinized, every charitable initiative questioned, every employee benefit calculated against shareholder returns. She'd saved her company by agreeing to transform it into something she no longer recognized. The front door opened, and David appeared in the porch light, wearing sweatpants and a faded navy t-shirt. He walked to her car with measured steps, neither hurried nor hesitant, and tapped gently on the passenger window. Emma unlocked the doors without a word. "Rough night?" he asked, as he slid into the seat beside her, bringing the scent of coffee and something distinctly comforting that Emma couldn't identify. "I won," Emma said flatly. "I kept control of my company, preserved my position, maintained my empire. So why does it feel like I lost everything that mattered?" David studied her profile in the dashboard light, taking in the exhaustion lines around her eyes, and the way her usually perfect composure had cracked. "Maybe because you did lose something that mattered. The question is whether it's something you can get back." Emma finally turned to look at him, seeing understanding rather than judgment in his expression. "Sophie must hate me. I promised I'd be there, and I chose a boardroom over her big moment." "Sophie doesn't hate you. She's disappointed, but she's also 8 years old and remarkably resilient." "You want to know what she said when she won first place?" Emma nodded, afraid to hear the answer but needing to know. "She said that even though you couldn't be there, you were the reason she understood how solar panels work. And that made you part of her victory anyway. Then she asked if we could save you a piece of celebration cake." The tears Emma had been holding back all day finally spilled over. "She saved me cake? After I broke my promise to her? That's who Sophie is. That's who we are. We don't keep score of disappointments or hold grudges over missed moments. Life is too short and too unpredictable for that kind of accounting. David reached over and covered Emma's hand with his own, the simple contact grounding her in a way that surprised her. "Emma, can I tell you something? When Sarah died, I thought my world had ended. I had this beautiful, brilliant daughter who needed me to be everything for her, and I felt like I was failing every single day. I worked construction jobs during school hours and worried constantly that I wasn't enough, that Sophie deserved better than a single dad who was making it up as he went along." Emma listened, hearing echoes of her own fears in his words. "Then you showed up in our lives," David continued. "This incredibly successful woman who could have done anything with her free time, but chose to help a third grader build a science project. You brought expertise and resources, yes, but more than that, you brought enthusiasm and patience and genuine care. You made Sophie feel special and smart and capable. Do you know how rare that is? I let her down tonight. You had a crisis at work. You made a difficult choice between competing priorities. That's not betrayal, Emma, that's life. What matters is what you do next." Emma looked toward the house, where she could see Sophie's bedroom window on the second floor. A small nightlight cast soft shadows on the curtains. "What if I can't do this? What if I'm too broken from my own losses to be good for either of you?" David was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "After Sarah died, I almost gave up. Not on Sophie, never on Sophie, but on the idea that I could ever be happy again. I thought that moving forward meant dishonoring her memory, that finding joy was somehow betraying the love we'd shared." He paused, watching a late-night jogger pass under the streetlight across the street. "Sophie was the one who taught me that love doesn't diminish when you share it, that honoring someone's memory doesn't mean freezing yourself in grief. She'd see me having a good day and say, 'Daddy, Mommy would want you to be happy.' 4 years old, and she understood something I couldn't grasp." Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained over her emotions for so long. "I don't know how to be vulnerable. I've spent so many years building walls, creating armor, protecting myself from disappointment. What if I don't know how to love without holding back?" "Then you learn," David said simply. "One day at a time, one moment at a time. Sophie and I, we're not going anywhere. We don't need perfection, Emma. We just need honesty." The next morning, Emma called in sick for the first time in her professional career. Instead of reviewing contracts and attending meetings, she spent the day at the zoo with David and Sophie, listening to an 8-year-old's detailed theories about animal behavior, and watching David patiently answer questions that ranged from philosophical to absurd. Over the following months, Emma gradually restructured her priorities. She remained CEO of Richardson Technologies, but she delegated more responsibilities and established boundaries that protected her personal time. Marcus's oversight proved less restrictive than she'd feared, partly because the company's performance remained strong, and partly because Emma discovered she could navigate corporate politics while staying true to her values. More importantly, she learned to navigate the delicate dance of joining a family that had been complete without her. David taught her that love wasn't about filling empty spaces, but about expanding the space for more love. Sophie showed her that children were remarkably adaptable and generous with their affection when treated with respect and consistency. 6 months after that night in the parking lot, Emma stood in David's kitchen, helping Sophie pack lunch for a field trip, while David grabbed his tool belt for an early job site meeting. The morning chaos felt foreign and wonderful to a woman who'd once eaten breakfast alone in corporate cafeterias. "Emma," Sophie said, carefully wrapping her sandwich in the way David had taught her, "are you going to marry my daddy?" David froze with his coffee cup halfway to his lips, and Emma felt heat flood her cheeks. But Sophie continued with the matter-of-fact directness that had become familiar. "Because if you are, I think that would be really good. You make him laugh more, and he makes you smile with your whole face instead of just your mouth. Plus, I could have a mom again, and you could have the family you always wanted." Emma knelt down to Sophie's eye level, seeing David's features reflected in the child's face, along with something uniquely her own. "Would you like that, sweetheart? Having me as part of your family permanently?" Sophie considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think Mommy Sarah would like you. You take care of people the way she did. And Daddy's happier when you're here. So yes, I would like that very much." David cleared his throat, setting down his coffee and moving to stand behind his daughter. "Well, since Sophie's given her approval, maybe it's time I made this official." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring, nothing like the elaborate diamond Marcus had once given her, but perfect in its understated elegance. "Emma Richardson," David said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "would you do me the honor of joining our crazy little family permanently? Fair warning, we eat cereal for dinner sometimes, we have dance parties in the living room, and Sophie still believes that vegetables taste better when you pretend they're trees being eaten by friendly dinosaurs." Emma looked at the ring, then at Sophie's expectant face, then at David's steady gaze that promised partnership rather than possession, growth rather than completion. "Yes," she said simply, "yes to all of it." The wedding was small and perfect, held in the backyard of the house they'd bought together, with Sophie serving as maid of honor and ring-bearer simultaneously. Emma's company continued to thrive under her leadership, now balanced with a life that included soccer games and bedtime stories, and Sunday morning pancakes that always somehow turned into flower fights. 2 years later, as Emma rocked their newborn son while David helped Sophie with homework at the kitchen table, she thought about that desperate night in the diner parking lot when she'd been sleeping in her car, convinced that success and isolation were the same thing. She'd built an empire, but she'd found her kingdom in the laughter of a child, the steady love of a good man, and the daily choice to show up for the people who mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.